It's taken me 30 years of study without myself being a CIA officer to try to understand how the CIA operates. It operates outside the laws of the United States. The Congress has given the CIA the right to commit crimes in foreign countries and also not to be prosecuted for those crimes in the United States. The CIA, everything it does is approved by Congress and the executive and the Supreme Court. It has the complete backing of the three branches of the United States government. No law enforcement branch in the United States, including the FBI, can prosecute the CIA for any crimes that it has committed. It is given a mandate to do these things. It is allowed to do these things. You just can't know about the things that it does, and it's wrapped in secrecy. And the first two criteria that the CIA follows is that when it considers launching an operation, that operation has to meet two criteria. First of all, it has to have some intelligence potential. It has to be, provide substance to the CIA's mill. It has to have some potential to do something that's of importance to the CIA. The second criteria, it has to be absolutely deniable. It can never be found out or discovered. So the CIA doesn't do anything unless it can deny it. And how it goes about denying and structuring its operations so that they are deniable is like the first thing that you have to understand. And it does it through its relationships with all the other branches of government in the United States. The CIA officers do not walk around presenting themselves to people overseas as CIA officers. They present themselves as State Department officers or military officers or as private businessmen. They all operate undercover so that everything that they do is deniable. And of course, the captains of the media industry, all the major publishers, all the major editors, all the major correspondents are aware of this, and they go along with it because you have to keep it secret. I'm Doug Valentine, and I'm the author of a book titled The CIA as Organized Crime: How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. The CIA created the Phoenix program in South Vietnam in the summer of 1967. Some senior CIA officers were asked to create by the White House to create a general staff for pacification to handle the pacification of South Vietnam. The CIA was given the job because the military, by law, is not allowed to target civilians. The CIA got the job for creating and managing the CIA program, the Phoenix program, because it was targeting the civilian leadership of the insurgency in South Vietnam, and it was felt in order to win the war, those people had to be what was called neutralized. So the Phoenix program was set up to go after those people. There were already about 25 programs in place. Some of them run by the military, some of them run by the CIA, many of them being run by the South Vietnamese police and military, which were already targeting this group of civilians. What the Phoenix program did was set up a center in Saigon, centers in every corps, at every province, in every province and in every district. These were called intelligence operations coordinating centers, IOCs, which were part of this, emanating from this Phoenix Center in South Vietnam. And each one of these centers at the district, province, corps, and national level coordinated these 25 programs and agencies that were already involved, so that it became a concerted effort under the direction of the CIA. Using standard intelligence programs, informants, interrogations, largely, and as well as electronic intercepts, the CIA, through the Phoenix program and all the programs that coordinated, set out to identify, first of all, who the leaders of the insurgency were. And its first goal was to turn these people into double agents, to recruit them in place so that they would then become spies within the insurgency and tell the CIA, well, what the plans and goals of the insurgency were so they would know ahead of a time. And there's a long way and many stages from that, going from that very top level down to the villages, where the Viet Cong also had operations and agent nets set up. So at the same time that they were trying to identify the leaders, they were also trying to identify the agents of the insurgency who were inside the villages at the very bottom level. Once agents had been identified at the village level, if those people existed in a village that was in enemy-controlled territory, then the Phoenix people would call in a B-52 to bomb them, and they would just bomb that village. Or they would send in assassination teams that were paramilitary CIA assassination teams that would sneak into the village at night and assassinate these people. And in the process of doing that, the CIA and the military also waged psychological warfare against these villages, in which all sorts of terrible things occurred, but largely they tried through propaganda and psychological operations to convince the villagers not to support these agents in the villages. And that basically amounted to terrifying anybody who supported the Viet Cong. So at the very basic level, bottom level at the village, the idea was to terrify people through the Phoenix program and make them not support these agents at the ground level. At the top level, the top tier, the idea was to keep these people in place, to keep the agent networks in place so that they could be penetrated and so that the CIA would know what their plans and objectives were. And in that sense, they were actually keeping the Viet Cong insurgency in place. So at the top level goal directly contradicted the very bottom level goal. But it was rationalized on the point of view that, the senior level people were important people, whereas the villagers were non-entities, and it was okay to slaughter and terrify them. The military certainly wanted to know, certainly had agents in enemy villages because they wanted to know when the insurgents were going to stage an attack. And that's what the tactical military intelligence is designed to determine where the enemy is and where they're going to be so that you can launch an attack against them. And if they thought that a village contained enemy soldiers, well, then it would turn into My Lai. They would just send in a couple of companies of men and they would wipe out everybody in that village. Or they would send, a B-52 or bombers to just bomb the village, which was often the way that they had done it. But by 1967, when the Phoenix program was instituted, they had realized that these kinds of really horrific, wiping out everybody in the village operations were doing nothing to win the hearts of the minds of the villagers to support the government. So Phoenix was implemented as a way to, whenever possible, bypass these kind of large military operations that utterly destroyed villages, and they tried to terrorize them on a more psychological basis, a more psychological warfare basis. They would bring them into interrogation centers. They would prevent them from getting jobs. The CIA could tell somebody, who worked at a school, well, this guy supports the Viet Cong. Now you're fired, now you got no job, now you're poor. So there's just a million ways to terrorize people. And they did them all. And that's what the Phoenix program was designed to do. But again, at the upper tier level, it was designed to keep the agent nets and the agents and the managers in place so that they could be penetrated, their operations could be penetrated, and so that they could be turned into secret agents themselves. William Colby, who was a former director of the CIA, had been the individual most closely associated with the Phoenix program. Colby had run the program in Vietnam for a couple of years. I sent a copy of my book, The Hotel Talk Loban, to Colby and asked him if he'd give me an interview about the Phoenix program. To my surprise, he called up on the phone and said, yeah, come on down, let's talk. And I met him again at his home in Georgetown, and we did a taped interview. He started introducing me to some of the senior CIA officers that had managed the Phoenix program and the programs that it coordinated. And to my surprise, pretty soon I was knee-deep in CIA officers who were telling me everything that was previously classified about the Phoenix program because Colby had sent me to him. William Colby had been in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, in World War II. One of his comrades from the OSS, a guy named Evan Parker, who was served in Burma in World War II in a different capacity. Parker had been an interrogator in Burma with the OSS in World War II, had been a close friend of Colby's. And so when the Phoenix program was created, Colby arranged for this fella, Evan Parker, to become the first senior director of the Phoenix program. Parker ran the Phoenix Directorate in Saigon starting in July of 1967. Parker and Colby had both entered the CIA when it was created. They had worked together at that point for 20 years. They were very close friends, and Colby wanted a trusted, person, somebody he could trust in the position of Phoenix director. And so he arranged for Parker to get the job. And I knew that Parker had been the first director, and I said to Colby, can you set me up with an interview with Parker? And he said, yeah. He invited me indoors, and we went up to his study, which was on the second floor. And he got very comfortable with me. He liked the way I looked. Or he said, I'm going to go downstairs, and I'm going to make us some tea and bring up some cookies. And there was a little coffee table in between us, and on that coffee table was a bunch of documents. And Parker said, so I'll be back in about 15 minutes. And he winked, and he went downstairs, and I opened the top document that was sitting on that coffee table, and it was a roster of all the people who were in the original Phoenix Directorate. All the military people by name and rank, and of course the CIA people were civilians, and there was about 40 or 45 names, and I just furiously wrote them down in my notebook with any kind of data that identified them. And about 15 minutes later, Parker yelled from downstairs, Doug, the tea's ready, I'm coming up. And so I put my notebook away and closed his file and just sat back, and he came up with a big smile on his face and put the tea and cookies down, and we just started talking about Phoenix. So when I got home, I immediately started, and this is like 1984, 85, trying to locate these people. When the CIA created the Phoenix program, the Vietnamese objected to it. I mean, they thought that the CIA was going to use it against them, members of the South Vietnamese government, okay? They saw it as a threat to their national sovereignty. And the CIA implemented the Phoenix program over the objections of the senior South Vietnamese police officials. I mean, they did not want it. They did not want the CIA being that deeply involved in espionage and intelligence operations, which they had been involved with for decades and which they had set up themselves. And so they resented the CIA taking over all these operations and telling them what to do. But the CIA went ahead and it implemented the Phoenix program over the objections of these people. The Vietnamese perspective and what the Vietnamese were thinking about the Phoenix program, which in many cases contradicted directly the propaganda and the public affairs statements that the CIA and the Americans were making about Phoenix. So I was able to get tremendous insights. And at the same time that I was interviewing all these CIA officers, you have to remember they were giving me, in many cases, the company line. And you can't distinguish our capitalist society from the goals of the CIA and the military in terms of its imperial objectives. It's, the objectives of the New York Times are the same as the CIA and the military when it comes to furthering America's capitalist goals of creating an empire. No matter if they periodically may criticize the methods or some things that are happening, they have that same overall goal, and they're both, and the media and the CIA and the military are all united in trying to achieve those goals. There's nothing that distinguishes them. Colby actually arranged for me to interview a guy named Frank Scotton. Frank Scotton was the United States Information Service, which is the propaganda branch of the United States State Department. It's the branch of the government that preaches the American line. They're the ones that come up with the words that are supposed to be used in order to try and bring citizens of foreign countries in an alignment with American goals and objectives. And Scotton was sent to Vietnam, South Vietnam in 1961. And he worked for a guy who was very closely involved with William Colby. And Scotton's job was setting up what were called armed propaganda teams. He was working with the CIA very closely. A couple of people told me he was actually in the CIA. And he was working with the paramilitary branches of the South Vietnamese police and military services. And they wanted to get the American point of view, the American line. They wanted to preach it to people who were in enemy territory. I was telling you earlier about villagers who supported the Viet Cong. So they would identify a village that supported the Viet Cong. And Scotton's job was to create a team, a paramilitary team of soldiers, many of which were listed as having deserted from the South Vietnamese army and were actually had contracts with the CIA. Guerrilla warfare. And they would be security for a team that would go into a village that was controlled by the enemy. And they would have with them agents of the United States Information Service. And they would go in, take over the village for a day, kill any of the Viet Cong that were there, gather all the villagers together, and they would give them a sermon about why the United States government was why these villagers should support the United States government and the government of South Vietnam instead of the Viet Cong. This is what the CIA does all over the world. Even now, they create little units like this, which are designed to try to speak to people at the village level and convince them to support the United States. Terrorizing these people is a big tool that they use. That was Scotton's job. By 1965, Scotton's program, this armed propaganda team program that he had piloted for the CIA starting in 1961-62, had gone nationwide. It was being used by the CIA in every district, in every province in South Vietnam. They bureaucratized it, they standardized it, and they created a training center in Vung Tau where they started training people how to do this, to perform these functions through Peter Dale Scott, who a lot of you people may know. Very famous writer who writes about the CIA and drug smuggling like I do. Some people feel it's their patriotic duty to keep the CIA's secrets. The paramilitary operations that I told you that Scotton was involved in, these kind of propaganda, psychological warfare operations, armed propaganda teams, which were basically terrorism, terrorizing the villages, or in drug smuggling. When the CIA wanted to create a compatible left in France after World War II, one of the things it did was hire a group of Corsican drug smugglers, the Guerrini family in Marseille, to bust up communist strikes in Marseille. The CIA gave through black bag money, hired these Corsican drug smugglers and to shellac the strikers, so that they basically hired gangsters to destroy the Communist Party in France and also in Italy, where, of course, during World War II, the CIA was intimately involved with the mafia. And after World War II, when the OSS was the forerunner to the CIA, wanted to take over political control of Sicily, it arranged for all these mafia guys to become mayors. They all worked with the CIA, and it had relations with underworld traffickers. The CIA has intimate relations with underworld traffickers here, drug traffickers here in the United States. When the CIA wanted to overthrow Cuba, it hired Santo Trafficante, who was the biggest drug trafficker in the mafia in the United States at the time, to try to arrange the assassination of Fidel Castro. That's the CIA working with the biggest drug trafficker in the United States, allowing drugs to come into the United States for the single purpose of trying to knock off Fidel Castro. I mean, that's a fact. And in doing that, it suborned the leadership of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which had no choice but to go along with it. It absolutely subverted the entire law enforcement branch of the United States government, federal drug law enforcement, and it has been doing that since its inception. When the CIA decided to fight a war in Laos, it created a secret army of Montagnard warriors under a general named Vang Pao. CIA allowed this guy Vang Pao to traffic in narcotics in exchange for offering up his tribespeople to fight this secret war. The CIA allowed the top generals and politicians in South Vietnam and Laos to traffic and make fortunes in narcotics in order to advance the political and economic interests of the United States government. So narcotic trafficking is one example. CIA has its hand in every kind of illegal operation that's being conducted in foreign countries all around the world. Arms trafficking, illegal arms trafficking, it happens every place where illegal drug trafficking goes on, and the CIA has its hand in it up until the point that it's actually managing it. Mexico is a great example of that. It's been going on in Mexico for 70 years. In order to destabilize the Mexican government, CIA arranges for guns to be smuggled into different various factions and for drugs to be smuggled out. Everybody knows this. It's a fact. And that's why I call the CIA the organized crime branch, in a few words, of the United States government. And that is also why everything is secret. And it's another reason why all the major media outlets and reporters and editors and publishers in this country protect the CIA, because it would absolutely destroy the illusion that the United States is a force for good and that it's the bright shining light of the world. If people knew what the CIA was doing, they would understand that the United States wages war crimes as policy, that it's involved in crime all over the world, managing crime all over the world. And it would it would be like suddenly exposing to all the Catholics that there is no God. It would just turn the United States upside down if people really understood just how evil its leadership is and how it affects its really evil plans and objectives secretly through the CIA. If anybody could be said to run the CIA, it would be the major industrialists in the United States, the major financial institutions, Wall Street investment firms have a lot of influence over the CIA. The petrochemical industry, perhaps one of the major influences over the CIA is the arms industry. Lockheed Martin, all the people who create and build aircraft carriers, warplanes, the whole arms industry. It's a boondoggle for the imperialism. Capitalism is a boondoggle for the 1%. And nowadays you have to include the high-tech industries, software, computer companies. I mean, a very small percentage of our population is making billions and billions of dollars out of American capitalism and imperialism. And if anybody could be said to run the CIA, it's those people in their totality. It's an idea. It's an ideal. It's a belief that Mother Earth and our planet is something to be raped and robbed and stolen from, and that the people of the planet are inherently useless and worthless, and that they're just there for us to be exploited. Anybody who has those ideas, no matter whatever level you're at in the economic scale in the United States, if you believe those things, then you're helping to run the CIA, and you're supporting it in its sabotage and subversion of sovereign nations all around the world who, in many cases, really want to respect the planet and implement public policies that are humane. The Phoenix program can be seen as a bureaucratic way of organizing systems, the justice system, the healthcare system, all the different systems that go into making a country. The Phoenix program is a way of coordinating all these various systems and bringing them under political control so that certain political objectives and economic objectives can be met. And of course, it combines essentially the police and the military with civic organizations in order to identify people who are considered people who can't be assimilated ideologically into the systems that are trying to be defended. Okay, and I noticed immediately after 9/11, the first thing that Bush did, President George Bush at the time, was to create an Office of Homeland Security. And the Office of Homeland Security was going to create in every state a center that would bring together police forces with military, what was called NORTHCOM, the branch of the military that's involved in policing, in a sense, North America, the branch of the military that operates here domestically, with the FBI and every other law enforcement and paramilitary and civic organization in specific centers around the country for the specific purpose of identifying potential terrorists. And this was exactly the bureaucratic system that the CIA set up in South Vietnam through the Phoenix program. How the Phoenix program, as a bureaucratic system, was the model for the Department of Homeland Security, and how American citizens themselves are now, since 9/11, being treated the same way the citizens of South Vietnam were treated during the Vietnam War, as potential sources of information about terrorism and terrorists, and how they have to be propagandized and how they have to be controlled through really the systematic control of information to make them good citizens who support capitalism, the imperial goals of the United States, the foreign wars that the United States fights. If you're against the war in Afghanistan, or if you're against the war in Iraq, all of a sudden now you become a potential terrorist or somebody who's supporting terrorism, and your name goes into a computer that's kept in the local Department of Homeland office in whatever state you live in, and all that information about you is gathered in and a file is constructed on you if you're trying to if you're an activist in the environmental movement, or if you're in Veterans for Peace. You sure as hell are going to find your name on a target list of a potential terrorist supporter in the Department of Homeland Security, and you basically sacrifice your right to privacy. So any citizen now who, in even the smallest way, objects to stated policies here in the United States of especially as they regard the war on terror, fighting against terrorists in countries around the world, you become a terrorist surrogate, and you can be spied upon, and all sorts of terrible things can be done to you, not least of which is you're subject to surveillance and even intimidation in all sorts of ways. And that's what's happening here in the United States, and a lot of people are either on both the left and the right, are aware of it, that a lot of our civil liberties are being curtailed in the name of the war on terror. And it's really just psychological warfare techniques that were developed in South Vietnam during the war by guys like Frank Scott and these armed propaganda teams, the interrogation centers, the Phoenix Intelligence and Operation Coordinating Centers. All these things have been bureaucratized, and that bureaucratic system has now been applied here in the United States.
Tell me how Operation Jade Helm fits into this plan to manage the population here.
Well, Jade Helm was an example of for the first time, coordinating the military and the police services and the intelligence services here in the United States under the supposition that for the specific goal of putting down a counterinsurgency. Never before has it even been thought of that there might be a counterinsurgency here in the United States. Counterinsurgency against what? Through Jade Helm, as a training exercise to show police forces how to work with the military in order to develop informants within civic society, civil society, and how to be able to suppress civilians who are forming militias and or organizing in any way against the federal government. America is a militaristic society. After World War II, veterans who came back to the United States were quite glad to no longer be part of the military. They had seen horrible things, and they were satisfied to march in the Memorial Day parade. But they really wanted nothing to do with the military. There hadn't really been a standing military in the United States prior to World War II. But after World War II, the United States found itself controlling, basically operating occupation governments in a lot of countries overseas. The United States had an occupation government in Italy. It had an occupation government in Germany. It had an occupation government in Japan. And suddenly the United States military was spread all around the world. And with the advent of the war, the Cold War, and the fight against the Soviet Union, it expanded all those military bases overseas under the aegis of the fighting a war against communism. The United States now has, 750 military bases around the world. And the military budget takes up the huge part of the American budget, 50% or something like that. A huge amount of money is expended to the military and supporting these military bases. And a lot of jobs in the United States depend on the military. People, it's a vast, big employer, not only people serving in the military, but the arms industry and the support industry. So since World War II, the United States has become absolutely militarized, and the military is venerated and in ways that it never was before. And especially since 9/11, the military has become involved less so in standard, traditional, conventional military operations as it has become involved in waging counterinsurgencies in foreign countries. For the first time since 9/11, most American soldiers are now involved in counterinsurgency operations. They operate in small units. They invade the homes of private citizens in foreign countries, and they perform overseas what is basically a police function. And when these veterans return to the United States, many of them join the police forces or become involved in law enforcement, or federal law enforcement, and they bring the expertise that they have learned in counterinsurgency operations back here to the United States. And the military, having such huge influence over civil society, is able to persuade local law enforcement to arm itself the same way that soldiers are armed overseas. And with the whole process and the bureaucracy now just has created this same attitude towards civilian society here in the United States as a potential enemy.